Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Hello, CJ.
Hello, Alma, and good evening to everyone watching the news. Here are the headlines.
Protesters faced off with police for a third night Tuesday in the American city of Minneapolis over the killing of a young black man shot by an officer, with more than 60 people arrested, according to law enforcement officials.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said Wednesday its decision to boost uranium enrichment to 60% was a response to arch foe Israel's nuclear terrorism against its Natanz facility.
President Joe Biden will formally announced Wednesday the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan before this year's 20th anniversary of the September 11 attacks, finally ending America's longest war despite mounting fears of a Taliban victory.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has designated European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet as a goodwill ambassador on the International Day of Human Space Flight.
First to the U.S., where protesters faced off with police for a third night in the American city of Minneapolis over the killing of a young black man shot by an officer, with more than 60 people arrested, according to law enforcement officials. Tensions have soared over the Sunday police shooting of Daunte Wright near the Midwestern city, in a community already on edge over the ongoing trial of an officer accused of killing another black man, George Floyd, last year. Earlier in the day, the families of Wright and Floyd came together to demand an end to police brutality. Take a look.
3 or 4 seconds went by. I tried calling it back to back to back because I didn't know what was going on. And I never imagined this is what was going to happen. I just thought maybe he was being arrested. And then when I called back, the girl that he had in the car answered the phone, and it was on a FaceTime. And she said, she was crying and screaming, and she said that they shot him. And she pointed the phone towards the driver's seat, and my son was laying there, unresponsive.
My Lord.
That was the last time that I seen my son. That's the last time I heard.
You hear the word accident? I want you all to be armed with some responses. An accident is knocking over a glass of milk.
Tell him, Jeff.
It's not an accident to take your gun out of the holster. It's not an accident to point your gun.
Tell him, Jeff.
It's not an accident to ignore the fact that what you're holding doesn't weigh the same amount as the taser that you've used in training hundreds of times.
Daunte Wright was shot dead during a traffic stop by a police officer who apparently confused her handgun with her taser in what the force later described as a horrible accident. The officer who shot Wright resigned on Tuesday, as did Brooklyn Center Police Chief Tim Gannon, who had told reporters earlier that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet. The families rejected the accident explanation, as several relatives and activists at the press event called for the officer to be arrested and jailed for her actions. President Joe Biden called the killing tragic but urged calm as authorities conduct an investigation. Riot police moved in to disperse a group of demonstrators estimated to number between 800 and 1,000 in Brooklyn Center, the suburb where Sunday's shooting took place.
Mayor Mike Elliott of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, announces that he has received resignation letters from the white police officer who fatally shot a black man during a traffic stop, and that of the city's police chief. On Monday, the city council voted to relieve the city's manager of his duties. They also voted in support of relieving the police chief and the officer involved in the shooting. Watch this.
As of this morning, we have the resignation. We have received a resignation letter from Officer Kim Porter. And in addition to that, we have also received a letter of resignation from the police chief. The council then took action to relieve the city manager of his duties. As you all know, the city manager had responsibility and command over the police department until yesterday.
On the body camera footage, police officers are seen pulling Wright out of his car after stopping him for a traffic violation and discovering he had an outstanding warrant. When officers attempt to handcuff Wright, he scuffles with them and gets back in the car. A female police officer shouts, "Taser, taser, taser," but a gunshot is then heard. The officer says, "I shot him." Authorities say the shooting of Dante Wright was a tragic mistake and that the officer pulled her gun instead of a taser. Members of Wright's family and others say the shooting is the latest example of a broken criminal justice system. Wright's killing Sunday has triggered a fresh tumult. Around 40 protesters were arrested overnight in Minneapolis as a second night of violence broke out despite imposition of a curfew. Law enforcement officials said several officers suffered minor injuries and there was sporadic looting. Hundreds of protesters gathered in front of the police station in Brooklyn Center, the Minneapolis suburb where Wright was killed.
President Joe Biden will formally announce the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan before this year's 20th anniversary of the September 11 attacks, finally ending America's longest war, despite mounting fears of a Taliban victory. Biden's decision came as Turkey announced the dates of a U.S.-backed peace conference that would bring together the Afghan government, the Taliban, and international partners. The April 24 to May 4 conference will aim to lead to a roadmap to a future political settlement and an end to the conflict, according to the Turkish Foreign Ministry in a statement. But Mohammed Naeem, spokesman for the Taliban office in Qatar, said the insurgents will not participate in any conference on Afghanistan's future until all foreign forces completely withdraw from our homeland, unquote. The Times newspaper said Britain would withdraw its roughly 750 troops, citing sources as saying they would struggle without American support because of a reliance on U.S. bases and infrastructure. The government did not deny the report. Under the Trump administration's February 2020 deal with the Taliban, all U.S. troops were to leave by May 2021 in return for the insurgents' promise not to back al-Qaeda and other foreign extremists, the original reason for the 2001 invasion.
Meanwhile, Osaka tops 1,000 coronavirus infections for the first time. We have Lou Omelda of our Osaka, Japan Bureau with that story. Lou, please tell us more.
Yes, Ms. CJ. 1,099 new COVID-19 cases shook the prefecture of Osaka Tuesday, having the highest record of new cases in a day since the pandemic began in Japan. This is following the announcement of a medical state of emergency last Wednesday, April 7th, as its medical system continued to suffer in handling the rapid increase of coronavirus cases. On that same day of declaration, 878 new cases were recorded in Osaka, which also shows a huge increase from the current record. So today, the daily recorded cases has reached 1,130. Osaka's government also announced 2 days earlier that all drinking and dining establishments be closed at 8 p.m. until May 5th, following the safety protocols of social distancing and wearing masks. This local state of emergency is the prefecture's second declaration with voluntary measures only and not imposing legal consequences. Meanwhile, schools will stay open because the spring term has just begun. Moreover, the Tokyo Olympic torch relay that was supposed to pass through Osaka at public roads on the 13th and 14th of April was still held, but at a public park amidst the surge of coronavirus cases. CJ?
Thank you so much, Lou, for your report from Osaka. Please do stay safe over there and keep us posted on whatever's happening there.
Yes, thank you. Reporting from Osaka, Japan, this is Lou Omelda. We live in interesting times.
The ongoing repression of largely peaceful protests in Myanmar could descend into full-blown conflict on a par with Syria. That is according to UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet, warning this on Tuesday. In a fresh appeal to the country's military rulers to stop using live ammunition on demonstrators, the High Commissioner urged states with influence to take immediate and impactful action to halt the slaughter of civilians. From the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, here's spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani in Geneva.
We have witnessed yet another weekend of coordinated bloodshed in many parts of the country, including the reported mass killing of at least 82 people in Bago between Friday and Saturday. The military seems intent on intensifying its pitiless policy of violence against the people of Myanmar, using military-grade and indiscriminate weaponry. The High Commissioner states that there are clear echoes of Syria in 2011. There, too, we saw peaceful protests met with unnecessary and clearly disproportionate force. The state's brutal, persistent repression of its own people led to some individuals taking up arms, followed by a downward and rapidly expanding spiral of violence all across the country. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time warned in 2011 that the failure of the international community to respond with united resolve could be disastrous for Syria and beyond. The past 10 years have shown just how horrific the consequences have been for millions of civilians. The High Commissioner fears that the situation in Myanmar is heading towards a full-blown conflict. States must not allow the deadly mistakes of the past in Syria and elsewhere to be repeated. Over the weekend, credible reports indicate that the Tatmadaw forces opened fire with rocket-propelled grenades, fragmentation grenades, and mortar fire in Bago, in the south of the country. Some individuals are now resorting to the use of makeshift or primitive weapons in self-defense. Clashes between the military and ethnic armed groups have also intensified in several locations in Kachin, Shan, and Kayin states, where the military have been employing airstrikes that have killed and displaced civilians. The mass arrests have forced hundreds of people to go into hiding, and reports suggest that many journalists, civil society activists, celebrities, and other public figures are being sought, many simply because of the dissent they have been expressing online. Wireless broadband and mobile data services were cut indefinitely on the 2nd of April, leaving the vast majority of the population without access to vital sources of information and communication. The High Commissioner has called on the Myanmar military and neighboring states to facilitate humanitarian access to populations in need. She has urged neighboring states to give temporary protection to people fleeing the violence and to refrain from returning Myanmar migrants at this time. This is in accordance with the principle of non-refoulement. Statements of condemnation and limited targeted sanctions are clearly not enough. States with influence need to urgently apply concerted pressure on the military in Myanmar to halt the commission of grave human rights violations and possible crimes against humanity against the people. The High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, has stressed the need to cut off the supply of arms and finances to the military leadership that aid in its commission of serious human rights violations.
We are staying in Myanmar, where anti-coup protesters splashed red paint in the streets on Wednesday to symbolize the blood spilled and more than 700 lives lost in a brutal military crackdown. The country is barely functioning, and the economy has stalled since the military seized power from civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi on February 1. The military junta has sought to quell mass protests with lethal force, and a local monitoring group has verified at least 714 civilian deaths, but warns the toll is likely to be even higher. This week is Myanmar's New Year festival of Tingyan holiday, but normal festivities such as public water fights have been cancelled. Instead, protesters have been using Tingyan as a rallying point, or as bus shelters, and pavements were sprayed red on Wednesday in cities and towns nationwide.
In other news, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said its decision to boost uranium enrichment to 60% was a response to arch-foe Israel's nuclear terrorism against its Natanz facility. Tehran starting advanced centrifuges and producing more highly refined uranium is the response to your malice. That is according to Mr. Rouhani in a message aimed at Israel. Again, let's take a look.
نمیتونید شما توطئه کنید علیه ملت ایران، نمیتونید جنایت کنید در نتنز. دست شما رو ما میبریم وقتی جنایت کردید. دو تا دستتون رو ما زدیم، یکیش با آیار 6 زدیم، یکیش با 60% زدیم. معلومه که نمیستیم، ما معطل نمیمونیم. صدورنا.
The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran said a small explosion had hit the plant's electricity distribution center, causing damage that it said would be quickly repaired. Iran's foreign ministry, meanwhile, accused Israel of an act of terrorism and vowed revenge. Iranian government spokesman Ali Rabiei said Tuesday the sabotage occurred in a duct of power cables leading to the centrifuge machines, which caused damage to this system. The alleged sabotage took place less than 24 hours after Iran announced it had brought into service or begun testing several hundred centrifuges forbidden under the 2015 agreement. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied involvement, but public radio reports said it was a sabotage operation by the Mossad spy agency, citing unnamed intelligence sources. The New York Times, quoting unnamed U.S. and Israeli intelligence officials, also said there had been an Israeli role in the attack. Natanz is a key center for Iran's nuclear program and is kept under high security.
Meanwhile, Ali Vaez, analyst with the International Crisis Group, said Iran's vow to step up enrichment is an extremely worrisome development because 60% enrichment is perilously close to weapons-grade uranium. Watch this.
Sure. This is an extremely worrisome development because 60% enrichment is perilously close to weapons-grade uranium. And this is bound to increase international concerns about Iran's nuclear program. And it would significantly reduce the time that Iran would need to enrich enough uranium to weapons grade, the so-called breakout time. So it is undoubtedly going to increase tensions and make efforts at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal that much more difficult. Now, in response to this alleged sabotage of the Natanz nuclear facility, the Iranians are further ratcheting up their nuclear program. So the signal that they're sending is that what Israel is trying to do to curb Iran's nuclear program is bound to backfire and would only result in further growth of the program. Because I think the Iranians were desperate to demonstrate that they're not coming back to Vienna from a position of weakness because of what has happened in Natanz, but in fact, they have a strong hand and a lot of options for further escalation. But this, without any doubt, would make discussions much more complicated because the Iranians would also be much more reluctant to compromise out of fear that that would be interpreted as a consequence of what has happened in Natanz. I think the U.S. negotiators are going back to the table more or less with the same approach that they had last week when the talks started, and have not necessarily adjusted their approach based on what has happened in Natanz. And that's one of the reasons that I think forward movement is going to become more difficult in the coming days. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure Israel is too unhappy about the Iranian response. It appears that Israel conducts these operations precisely to provoke the Iranians to overreact and take escalatory measures of their own in order to make sure that the restoration of the JCPOA is no longer on the cards.
In other news, more than 100 protesters gathered outside the Japanese Prime Minister's office in Tokyo to demonstrate against the decision to release tons of treated radioactive water from the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea. Take a look.
大きなショックを受けて、私は福島県の出身なので、より多くすごいショックを受けているところです。もう絶対に海に流してほしくないです。
もうやめてくれと放射能でですね福島をはじめとして日本国中をですね汚すのはやめてちょうだいと。
Japan will release more than 1 million tons of treated water from the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean, according to the government on Tuesday, and that triggered a furious regional reaction and fierce opposition from local fishing communities. The process isn't likely to begin for several years, and it could take decades to complete. But China quickly slammed the decision as extremely irresponsible, and South Korea summoned the Japanese ambassador. Japan's government argues the release is safe because the water is processed to remove almost all radioactive elements and will be diluted. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, has endorsed the release, which it says is similar to the disposal of wastewater at nuclear plants. Elsewhere, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga told a ministerial meeting that disposing of the water was an inevitable task in the decades-long process of decommissioning the nuclear plant. He said the release would happen only after ensuring the safety levels of the water and alongside measures to prevent reputational damage. Around 1.25 million tons of water have accumulated in tanks at the nuclear plant, which was crippled after going into meltdown following the 2011 tsunami. It includes water used to cool the plant, as well as rain and groundwater that seeps in daily.
Meanwhile, we're staying in Japan, where the country marks 100 days to start the delayed Tokyo Olympic Games. We have Dennis Liu for the details. Dennis, tell us more, please.
Yes, CJ. A Western Japanese city canceled the Tokyo Olympics torch relay over spiking coronavirus cases on Wednesday, fueling fresh fears about whether the pandemic-postponed games should go ahead with just 100 days until the opening ceremony. Cancellation is certainly not on the table. International Olympic Committee, or IOC Vice President John Coates told reporters on Wednesday. Here's Mr. John Coates, the IOC Coordination Commission Chair.
It certainly will happen. It'll commence the Games on the 23rd of July. And I think this is a great credit to what President Bach and I and others have described as the best prepared ever Games. And the work of the organising committee has just been quite outstanding in this regard, and have no hesitation in saying the Games will take place and they'll be the safest Games possible. All of the countermeasures have been put in place to deal with COVID, to ensure that the public, the athletes and all of the other participants are safe. They will take place as scheduled.
COVID-19 surges across Japan have forced the government to tighten restrictions only weeks after they were lifted. And on Wednesday, the head of Tokyo's Medical Association warned the rising infections could make holding the games really difficult. Coates acknowledged the situation, but insisted organizers and Olympic officials have prepared for the worst possible scenarios. Organizers have released playbooks outlining antivirus measures, which will be updated later this month. Tens of thousands of athletes and other Olympic participants arriving from overseas will be able to skip quarantine and are not required to show proof of vaccination. But athletes will be asked to limit their movements, stay only at the Olympic Village during their events, and face regular virus testing. Overseas fans have already been barred from the games, and a decision on domestic spectator numbers could come in April. Still, the atmosphere will be far from the usual rowdy celebrations, and it remains unclear how strong demand for tickets will be when they finally go back on sale. Polls show most Japanese back either a further postponement or cancellation, but the numbers in favor of holding the games this summer had crept up to around 27% in March, from just 11% in January. Expressed mixed feelings about Tokyo residents' prospect of the games. Olympic organizers acknowledged the mood, but said they expect it to shift once athletes take stage. Back to you, CJ.
Well, Dennis, best prepared ever games. Interesting statement there by the Olympic Committee, of course. We're looking forward to more stories coming out of Japan as we do the countdown to the Tokyo Olympics. Take care, Dennis, and thank you for your story.
Definitely, CJ. Thank you very much, CJ. Reporting live from Yokohama, Japan, this is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
In a related news, Tokyo Governor Yurike Koike says she hopes the Tokyo 2020 Olympics will be an unforgettable event, despite the challenges facing the postponed games. With 100 days to go until the opening of the event on July 23, a rise in COVID cases in Japan and abroad is fueling concerns about whether the games can or should go ahead. Take a look.
This このように1年延期をされたのもこれまで人類にとりましてもですね、大きな試練となっています見えざる敵コロナとの戦い、これがそもそもの理由でございますけれども、それだけにですね、この心に残るそのコロナとの戦いを超えてですね、開催できる大会にしていく、そしてまたそれを皆さんと共に果たしていく、そのような2020大会へと向かっていきたいと思います。
Back to coronavirus news now. U.S. health authorities recommended pausing the Johnson & Johnson COVID shot over blood clot fears, with the White House saying it was confident that there would be no significant impact on the vaccination plan in the world's hardest hit country, where almost half of all adults have now received at least one dose. Officials said out of nearly 7 million Americans who have received or so far received the single dose vaccine, 6 women between the age 18 and 48 developed a rare type of blood clot in the brain. One later died, while another is in critical condition.
Vaccination program.
I think this is an unusual occurrence of a serious adverse event that you want to make sure before you go forward, you investigate it thoroughly. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're pausing so that they can look at it more carefully.
This announcement will not have a significant impact on our vaccination program. The J&J vaccine makes up less than 5% of the more than 190 million recorded shots in arms in the United States to date. So we have more than enough supply of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to continue the current pace of about 3 million shots per day.
Hundreds of people have tested positive for coronavirus in India at the site of the world's biggest religious festival. Officials said Wednesday as huge crowds of mostly maskless Hindu devotees descended on the river Ganges. Take a look. The virus was detected in more than 1,000 people in just 48 hours in the city of Haridwar, which lies along the river where the Kumbh Mela is being observed, according to officials. A new wave of coronavirus infections is sweeping across India, with experts blaming massive religious events, packed political rallies in poll-bound states, and crowded public places like this. India just overtook Brazil this week to become the country with the second highest number of COVID cases in the world. India's daily death toll passed 1,000 on Wednesday for the first time since mid-October.
Britain's Johnson says a drop in infections is due to lockdown, not vaccine. We have Kathleen Eusebio of our EBC UK Bureau with more of that story. Kathleen?
Hi, CJ. Britain said late Monday it had hit a target to offer a coronavirus vaccine first dose to all over 50s by mid-April, as England's lockdown-weary population toasted a significant easing of restrictions. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the UK had passed another hugely significant milestone after confirming a jab had been offered to all over 50s, the clinically vulnerable and health and social care workers, ahead of a self-imposed April 15 deadline. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson stated, "It is very important for everybody to understand that the reduction in these numbers, in hospitalizations and in deaths, and in infections has not been achieved by the vaccination program. People don't, I think, appreciate that it's the lockdown that has been overwhelmingly important in delivering this improvement in the pandemic and in the figures that we're seeing." He also said, "Of course, the vaccination program has helped, but the bulk of the work in reducing the disease has been done by the lockdown. So as we unlock, the result will inevitably be that we will see more infection. And sadly, we will see more hospitalization and deaths, and people have just got to understand that." Efforts will now focus on delivering second doses and offering all adults an initial shot by August, after more than 32 million people have been given the precious protection vaccines provide against COVID-19, he also stated in a statement. The British leader had earlier hailed the latest lifting of rules as a major step forward in our roadmap to freedom. On London's Oxford Street, some shoppers braved the chilly temperatures to start queuing at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before the first non-essential shops, such as fast fashion chain Primark, opened. Barbers and hairdressers were also able to restart, with demand for much-needed trims high more than 3 months after the latest stay-at-home order began. As sports and leisure facilities also reopened in England, people plummeted into pools and lifted weights. Families also gathered to see lions and elephants at Chester Zoo in northwest England, and thrill seekers enjoyed rides at Thorpe Park theme park in southwest of London. Self-catering domestic holidays are also allowed, and bookings have increased. Back to you, CJ.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, for your story there from London, UK. Please do take care over there and tell us more if there are any more developments.
Thank you, CJ. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Kathleen Eusebio. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden urged his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin to ease mounting tensions with neighboring Ukraine, joining a pushback against the buildup of troops along their border that has alarmed NATO allies. President Biden voiced, quote, our concerns over the sudden Russian military buildup in occupied Crimea and on Ukraine's borders and called on Russia to de-escalate the tensions, the White House said after the phone call. Again, let's listen in.
During this call, they discussed a number of regional and global issues, including the intent of the United States and Russia to pursue a strategic stability dialogue on a range of arms control and emerging security issues, building on the extension of the New START treaty. President Biden also made clear that the United States will act firmly in defense of its national interests in response to Russia's actions, such as cyber intrusions and election interference.
As a new report from American intelligence said, Russia wasn't seeking direct conflict with the U.S. President Biden, in a telephone conversation with President Putin, proposed a summit between the two leaders at a neutral venue in the coming months. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Wednesday that the offer would be studied, but President Putin spoke quickly on Tuesday night with Finland's President Sauli Niinistö, who said in a statement that the two had discussed the call with Biden and, quote, the planned meeting of the two presidents. Finland, if you can remember or to recall hosted the last summit between Russian and U.S. leaders in 2018 when President Putin met with then-President Donald Trump. The Russian buildup at the Ukrainian border has caused growing concern in the West in recent days, with the U.S. saying that troop levels are at their highest since 2014, when war first broke out with Moscow-backed separatists. Ukraine, which applied to join NATO in 2008, is pressing Western powers for practical support as it seeks to deter any aggression from Moscow.
President Joe Biden sent an unofficial delegation of former U.S. officials to Taiwan today in a signal of support for the democratic island as it faces increasingly hostile moves by China. Beijing, which claims self-ruled Taiwan and vows to seize it one day, blasted the trip. China has already lodged stern representations with the U.S. against the sending of personnel to visit Taiwan, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian told reporters. Former Senator Christopher Dodd and former Deputy Secretaries of State Richard Armitage and James Steinberg touched down in Taipei on Wednesday afternoon, live television images showed. They are expected to meet President Tsai Ing-wen on Thursday. Taiwan's 23 million people live under the constant threat of invasion by authoritarian Beijing, which uses diplomatic, economic, and military pressure to keep the island isolated on the world stage. Over the past year, Beijing's saber rattling has increased considerably, with Chinese fighter jets and nuclear-capable bombers breaching Taiwan's air defense zone on a near-daily basis. A record 25 Chinese military jets and bombers breached Taiwan's defense zone on Monday. Washington has diplomatically recognized Beijing over Taiwan since 1979, but it maintains relations with Taipei and is bound by an act of Congress to sell the island defensive weapons. It also opposes any attempt by China to change Taiwan's future by force. This week's delegation comes on the 42nd anniversary of that legislation, the Taiwan Relations Act, which Biden signed when he was a young senator.
Meanwhile, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry was set to arrive in China today for what Beijing said would be a 4-day trip. as the two countries seek cooperation over the environment despite acrimony on other fronts. In the first trip to China by a Biden administration official, the former Secretary of State will visit Shanghai before traveling on to the South Korean capital, Seoul. His trip comes in preparation for President Joe Biden's virtual climate summit next week, to which the U.S. leader has invited both Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Beijing, which has so far not committed to President Xi's presence at the summit, said Kerry would arrive on Wednesday and stay until Saturday at the invitation of China. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said that during the trip, Kerry will meet with China's climate envoy Xi Zhenhua and exchange views on Sino-U.S. cooperation on climate change, giving no other details. Kerry's trip comes despite a testy initial meeting last month in Alaska between top Biden officials and their Chinese counterparts. The two sides clashed over accusations that China is violating promises of freedoms to Hong Kong and carrying out genocide against Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minorities in the northwestern Xinjiang region. Washington is hoping to find areas of common ground despite the high political tensions. Kerry had told CNN that although Washington and Beijing had big disagreements, climate has to stand alone.
Meanwhile, the attorney for Derek Chauvin began his defense of the former Minneapolis police officer on Tuesday, calling his first witnesses in an effort to sow doubt in the jury's mind over what caused the death of George Floyd. Defense expert Barry Vance Broad tells a court in Minneapolis that Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd was justified and that he was acting with objective reasonableness following Minneapolis Police Department policy in current standards of law enforcement. Take a look.
Do your seatbelt. Let her take care of her guy. Just keep your hands out where I can see him. Hey! Let me... Keep your hands where I can see him. Okay? Put them up on the dash. Put them on the dash. I'm not going to shoot you. Put your hands on the dash.
I felt that Derek Chauvin was justified and was acting with objective reasonableness, following Minneapolis Police Department policy and current standards of law enforcement in his interactions with Mr. Floyd.
On the passenger side, the passenger window was down. I started giving the individual that was in the passenger seat commands several times. The passenger was unresponsive and non-compliant to my commands. I then had to physically reach in because I wanted to see his hands because I couldn't see his hands. I reached in finally and grabbed his hand to put it up on the dash, and then that individual was taken from the vehicle and handcuffed.
Does the fact that Mr. Floyd was handcuffed somehow come into the analysis as to whether or not to put him into a prone position?
No, any resistor, handcuffed or not, should go to the ground into a prone control position.
And Mr. Floyd is sitting on the sidewalk against the dragon walk?
Yes.
He doesn't appear to be threatening in any way at that time, does he?
No.
Doesn't appear to be agitated or upset in any way at that time?
No.
So right there sitting on the sidewalk, he was pretty peaceful?
Yes.
You heard later there was a call for code 3 on the ambulance, the EMS, correct?
Yes.
But there was never a call for code 3 for the responding officers?
I don't believe so, no.
And does the Minneapolis Police Department train cadets? What types of things cause excited delirium?
In a general sense, yes. Okay. It's a combination of pre-existing factors. It could be cardiovascular disease, also illicit drug use, and also mental health diagnoses.
Okay, put them up on the dash.
Body cam footage displayed by the defense at Derek Chauvin's murder trial in Minneapolis shows George Floyd being handcuffed by a police officer during a traffic stop in May 2019. Chauvin's defense claims Floyd's death was due to his consumption of fentanyl and methamphetamine and underlying health conditions. Medical experts called by the prosecution said Floyd's death was caused by a low level of oxygen from the neck restraint and not due to drugs or pre-existing conditions. Chauvin faces up to 40 years in prison if convicted of the most serious charge, second-degree murder. A 19-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department, Chauvin was fired from the force after Floyd's death. 3 other former police officers involved in the arrest are to be tried separately later this year.
You're not going to get beat up or nothing. You just follow what we're asking you to do. I apologize, man. I apologize, man. I apologize. Do your seatbelt. Let her take care of her guys.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. CJ and I will be back right after this short break.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Finally, in our news, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO, has designated European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet as Goodwill Ambassador on the International Day of Human Spaceflight. Take a look.
These decisions are being... When you have this in front of your eyes, when you understand all this, then you're trying to find a way to take action and to make things better, and to help that spaceship Earth, fly for as long as possible in the best shape as possible for all the crew. So that was the next logical step for me. I wanted to take action. I wanted to be closer to some international cause, and I think it all starts with food and food security. So I got closer to FAO. We started working together, and then today we're ready to take it to the next level. It makes you think quite a bit about just the impact of our activities on the planet. So I think one element of it is you adapt your own behavior. You're trying to be more conscious, more cognizant of the environment and the consequences of your action at your level. But I think it's also hugely important that at a political level, the good decisions are being made, because there's only so much you can do at a personal level, and you need also to action the levers at a higher level. So that's why I'm trying to advocate for the planet in general, for the environment in general. I'm talking to the people, but I'm also talking to leaders, I hope, and we see things changing slowly. We hope in the future they're going to change even faster. And the goals of those 6 months on board the space station are mostly, there's 2 things. It's research. We're doing science experiments up there that you couldn't be doing on Earth because of the condition of microgravity in the space environment up there. And so we're sending the results back to all the laboratories on the Earth to make things better and to find new discoveries and to make progress, just generally speaking. The other thing that we're doing is also preparing the next steps of space exploration, because we have big questions to answer. Where did life come from on the Earth? Could life disappear today? Could we lose our atmosphere, lose our water like happened on Mars, for example? And that's why we want to go, because we want to answer those questions, to know where we come from. It wasn't easy. I mean, it's certainly been harder for a lot of other people. So I can't complain, but we had to adapt. We had to change the way we were doing things. Just like everyone everywhere on the planet, we had to reduce our human interactions. We did everything remotely. We tried to reduce attendance to a minimum to all our training activities. We put measures into place, obviously, masks, social distancing, everything was being taken very seriously. In spite of all this, we managed to be ready on time, which is quite amazing. But I think it just speaks volumes about just the resilience that people have in the space business, but really everywhere on the planet. There's even some technical innovations that I've specifically asked for my next mission, where we're trying to have edible packaging. So not only do you use the food, but also the packaging that you need to bring the food to technologies we hope are going to have some, and those are right in the ballpark of FAO.
Contribute to making this planet more small. That's it for today. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again.
Remains so much more to be grateful for. We live in interesting times.